So, thank you all for being here and joining us today. This is our REDi chat, and the topic is all about disclosure. Personally, a topic that I can talk about all day, given the chance, but I'm not here to talk about it today. We've got three amazing humans here with us today to kind of provide some of their personal and lived experiences of disclosure and some of their professional. Rather than me kind of introduce each of you separately, I'll go around, and if you're able to kind of introduce yourself, some of your experiences and why you are taking part today, that would be amazing. So Mel, let's start with you, just because you are in the right hand corner of my screen and that's the way my brain works.
No problem at all. So I'm Mel. I actually work for Rangam. I'm only 4 weeks in, but absolutely loving it so far. It's great to, I suppose, work somewhere where I can really make an impact, especially as a neurodivergent person. So I was diagnosed with autism and dyspraxia age 6. Quite unusual, especially for a girl to be diagnosed that young, especially at that time when there wasn't really much public discussion around autism. So I was very, very fortunate in that sense. And I also suspect I might have ADHD as well. So, I'm as neurodivergent as they come. I'm really looking forward to this discussion today. It's a really important topic. So,
thank you so much, Mel. It's so nice to have you here and really appreciate you sharing some of that kind of information with us. So thank you. Kate, over to you.
Good morning, everybody. My name's Kate Dean. I'm director of a company called Enable Disability and Inclusion Consultants. I am a fellow neurodivergent person, so I'm ADHD and dyspraxic, and hopefully bring all the strengths and of those neurodivergence to the work that I do. So prior to starting my business 2 years ago, I worked for 14 years in universities in higher education. Primarily leading and managing the student-facing disability support teams. So I'm not very good at estimating, but I can definitely say I have worked with thousands of disabled students over the years, lots of neurodivergent students, but pan-disability, and I have managed lots of disabled team members, and again, kind of bringing my own lived experience as a manager as well, which there are lots of great skills that as managers we can bring to the table as well. So hopefully talk about some of those
I'd love
things.
to talk about some of those things, because I think some of the probably misconceptions of neurodiversity and neurodivergence is that perhaps people won't necessarily be as strong at the leadership or manager positions, but as we know, and as you've all proved here today, that is a kind of a complete falsehood, and there's some really recognized skills that come with neurodivergence that can make absolutely excellent managers and leaders. Thanks, Kate. And Chris, last but definitely not least, over to you.
Good morning, everyone. So I'm Chris Bosher. I work for an organisation called 𝗧𝗦, and we're a training and coaching provider specialising in neurodiversity and disability. I'm actually neurotypical, but what I'm here today is because I've got experience with disclosure, both positive and negative, and it's really to explain my journey, my recommendations, and just a bit of encouragement, really, just to raise awareness and try and relieve some of this stigma. So, and my side of it, sorry, I should have said, is more I've been diagnosed with anxiety and depression. So that's what I'll be focusing on today.
Thanks, Chris. And I think it's such an important part of the conversation. So we really appreciate you being here, because I think we talk about disclosure a lot. It's in the public eye a lot. We talk around disclosure of neurodivergence and everything else, but often disclosure of mental health gets missed from the conversation. And I'm sure as we go through and have the discussion today, we'll see some maybe specific challenges or worries that come with disclosing a mental health condition outside of a wider neurodivergence. So thank you so much for being here. So, like I said, it's not for me to be talking. The kind of floor is yours. So it's really, we'll go through, there's some kind of predefined topic. So how we'll do it is I'll kind of talk about the topic, and then we'll go through each of you and have that conversation. So I suppose, firstly, what I would love to know, and I'm sure everyone listening would love to know, is from each of you, what kind of are your thoughts on disclosure? And do you think disclosure can be a really positive tool for inclusion? Or do you think that at times it could create some exclusion? So over to you. I'll go through each of you so you each get a part to talk, because I know with sometimes with neurodivergence, everyone has lots to say and it's hard to know which bits are coming out. So Kate, let's start with you.
Thanks, Emma. Yeah, I mean, it's something that I've worked with for so many years with kind of students in the education system. And I think sharing that information could and should be a positive thing, and can definitely be a driver for enabling kind of inclusion, sense of belonging, all of those things that we're finally recognising are really, really important in the workplace. And of course, within any kind of ecosystem that we are living or studying within. But I don't think the systems are set up necessarily at the moment to create that positive space. And I think there are some really, really simple, straightforward, quick wins that people can start to do to start creating a safer space for people to share that information. So very much for me, it's about somebody, kind of sharing that, the desired outcome would be somebody sharing that information that is essentially part of them. And then very much that in the organisation that the individual's working for, matching people up with skill sets, getting people set up to succeed, whether it be with strategies, appropriate adjustments, or just kind of getting people to work to their strengths. Because after all, as employers, that's kind of what we want people to do. That's a bit of a win-win. Certainly from my experience of kind of working with students and now working with organisations, I have seen years and years of it play out with neurodivergence, and certainly with mental health, which has kind of gone through the roof in universities. Students are quite happy to share that information because they know they need to perhaps get extra time in exams or any of the other strategies. When it comes to graduation, they'll probably never talk about it again. And so it's really, really important that I think it should be organisational led as well, for organisations to create that safe space. So some of the work that I've been doing with organisations over the past couple of years is when the dreaded question comes out in kind of pre-employment questionnaires of, do you consider yourself to have a disability, to actually put some information around that. So to, kind of outline what a disability might constitute, to say why you're asking for that information, and to definitely clarify this is not about you then not being offered the job, which is still a massive misconception that's out there. It's very much to kind of be supportive with that and encourage that kind of safe sharing. So that's a huge thing for me. But also it's about lots of individuals that I talk to tell me they don't feel disabled enough. So it's a whole kind of question of identity and what that means. We've got a whole raft of work to do around the word disability. That's not a dirty word. It doesn't mean not abled. We have to start talking about this in line with the social model of disability, which I work to, which is very much about removing barriers. And lots of that are around attitudinal barriers. That's probably the biggest piece of work we've got to do around kind of neurodivergence and mental health. But then also it's about, that seamless process that happens within an employment life cycle. At what point are we asking people to share this information? What are we going to do with it? What happens next? And it's also about line managers knowing what to do with that. And lots of line managers I speak to absolutely want to do the right thing, but they are terrified. They're terrified of causing offence. They're terrified of breaching data protection. They don't know what to do with that information. And so we end up with a total impasse. So we need neurodivergent people like me that come and ask really blunt questions, that come and stick my nose into everything, because let's call me inquisitive rather than nosy. But, normalising the conversation. There are lots of the population that have a disability. We need to start talking about that and how we really start to map that into crucial parts of an employee life cycle to kind of get the best out of people.
I think that's great. And it's interesting what you said there as well, Kate, about people not feeling disabled enough. And it's kind of like, I wonder whether in the community there is a sense of imposter syndrome sometime, and maybe especially for people that were diagnosed later in life, like, well, actually, I've got to this point, and I know my strategies. I might still be struggling, but is it enough for me to now have to disclose? So something worth kind of as a group and as attendees starting to kind of think about and explore a little further. So Mel, what are your thoughts then on disclosure, and do you think it's can be a positive tool for inclusion?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Kate. I think it absolutely can be a positive tool, but to echo what Kate had just said, if it can only, I suppose it can only lead to a good conversation if the employer is equipped to receive this information and is willing to, I suppose, open up a dialogue about it. And I think Kate is kind of right when she says that a lot of organizations aren't necessarily there yet, and it's whether they don't have the vocabulary or whether they just don't know how to approach it yet, and they're maybe just not set up to facilitate that discussion. But I think a lot of organizations want to get there, and that is, a big part of the battle. But, obviously disclosure is such a complex topic, and it's, very personal to the individual. It's, I think a lot of people's feelings about it are going to vary depending on what your disability is, your individual experiences with the disability, how you feel your disability may impact your work positively or negatively. And, obviously the big one as well is how society actually perceives your disability, either, correctly or incorrectly. I mean, personally, I know I've had a pretty fluctuating relationship with whether I wanted to actually tell people that I was autistic for a pretty long time. As I said in my introduction, I was diagnosed very young, unusually young. So I did have what I suppose kind of overall was a privilege, that I knew I was autistic going into secondary school. But it didn't feel like a privilege at the time, because I remember I really did not want my new classmates to know that I was autistic or neurodivergent, because kids can be cruel, and I felt like it would put a target on my back for bullying. So I just felt in that particular scenario it was better that people didn't know. But then I remember literally on my very first day of classes, I was sitting in geography, and an SNA came knocking in the door and just announced in front of the whole class, Melissa Mooney, come with me, it's time for you to meet your resource teacher. Off you go to resource class. And I was fuming that someone else had just walked in out of nowhere without a moment's thought, just so thoughtlessly had just taken that choice away from me as to whether I wanted people to know I was autistic. And it just, I don't know, I felt so disempowered, I should say. And I think that was maybe an attitude I took forward into college, and then maybe even into my early career, where I was just so keen to show the world that I could succeed without any help. And I really just didn't want anyone to have that opportunity to, I suppose, discount my successes because I got, quote unquote, unfair advantages. I didn't want to be seen to be getting handouts. Like Kate was saying earlier, there's this whole question of how disabled are you? And I think, autistic women in particular are sort of met with indignance sometimes when explaining that they experience the world in a neurodivergent way. And, that's obviously a massive deterrent to disclosure, and it's such a vicious circle as well, because there's much more of a societal expectation on autistic women to mask or hide anything that would mark them as neurodivergent. So I think there is this fear of not being believed as well, because I was diagnosed so early and everything as well, that maybe at first glance I don't come across as neurodivergent, and so I did have so much internalized ableism in me by that point, that I think I actually almost paradoxically felt proud that I was keeping up with everyone else, even though I was working twice as hard. It was like I was in a paddle boat, and everyone else was in a boat that had an engine, and I was just paddling just to keep up. And I was basically look how I succeeded despite how hard it was made for me. Aren't I great? When in reality, it didn't need to be that hard in the first place. So I did end up realizing that this attitude of having to work twice as hard just isn't healthy, and I shouldn't have to feel like that I have to do that in order to keep up. And that's just going to inevitably lead into this never-ending cycle of autistic burnout, and that's just not fair or sustainable. It's just not a fair thing to expect of me. So I think it was kind of at that point that I realized that, for me at least, disclosure isn't just something good that could lead to something positive. It's something that's absolutely necessary for me. So, you know, I haven't looked back ever since. I kind of shout I'm autistic from the rooftops by now, and you know, I don't think it has harmed me at all. It's something that has been by and large quite positive for me.
I think that's amazing, and I love the example of the paddle boat. And I think everybody that we're listening into this now or listens into this in the future will absolutely recognise and relate to that analogy. It's interesting what you said. So when we think about like disclosure as inclusion or exclusion, it seems that if you have a positive first experience, then it can be a really inclusive thing to do. But actually, if your first experience of disclosure is negative in the way that you felt, actually it excludes you, because then your behaviours and what you then do in the future actually then impact your well-being, your wellness. So, and you're kind of having to overcome that first hurdle. So I guess from what both of you said, it's very much the attitudes of others around you are the people that can make sure that it's inclusive or exclusive, rather than the decision being like made personally, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, exactly.
Chris, over to you.
I think what you both said is absolutely spot on. You know,
It's always hard being the last one to go as well, because you're like, actually, I think you just said everything.
No, I generally agree with everything what you guys said. I think disclosure is an essential tool and should be used, and it should be received well. I think it's the only way we can overcome stigma and assumptions, you know, prejudice. It's the way forward. And I feel employees now want to help people, and it's more of how do we do it? You know, and I think by people actually coming forward and saying, actually, you know, I have got neurodiversity, I have got disability, I have got mental health, and I need support, I think can only be a great thing, you know, a very positive thing. And on the other side of it, disclosure, although it's hard and it is hard, I've been there, and I'm going to go through a couple of examples of where I've been with it. I think it's so essential, because I went for years hiding. I didn't want anyone to know I had a happy face on at work. Nobody knew inside that I was sort of melting away, crying inside, crying for help. But on the outside, I was smiling. I think generally as humans, human nature is, right, let's not show weakness. So you hide behind it. You get so used to being that person. If you're not showing, how are employees meant to understand, actually, we do need help, this individual, this employee, and how do we do it? So I think once you open up, from my experience, hiding behind that happy mask is so much harder than the actual opening up and going to employees saying, look, actually, I have got mental health, I do need help, this is what's happening, and it feels like a big weight off your shoulders. And then there's where the solutions come in, right? Excellent. How can we help you? What can we adapt for you? You know, what support do you need? And all of a sudden, it's open, it's out there, and it's a nice feeling. And I know there will be people, I'm sure, who are watching this or will be watching this and say, well, I've done that. I've spoken to my employer. I didn't get the response or the support I thought I would. And so why should I do it? I don't want to do it anymore. It's a big step. I've been burnt. I'm not going back. I've been there. So in the really early days before my official diagnosis, I went to a doctor, and the feedback I got was, well, think of the kids from Africa. You know, they got a lot less than you. They haven't got technology, haven't got running water. So put things into perspective. You know, there's nothing wrong with you. And that was heartbreaking, because you're like, well, I've done that. What's the point? The stigma's right.
Yeah.
Men shouldn't cry. Maybe you should hide behind this. Why am I talking? Why am I opening up? Just look, I'll get on with it. Which I did. And I went for years of, right, I'm good. I'm in a good place. Oh, no, I'm not so great. No, I'm good. I'm back. Because it really occurs, comes back, different things cause, you know, different coping mechanisms. Until one day, in one of my previous jobs, all I can explain, hit a mental breakdown. I hit a full-blown breakdown where I thought, I'm not going to get out of this. that I'm in the deepest, darkest place. I can't stop falling at rock bottom. What do I do? So I had no choice. I had to disclose. I had to open up to a director within the organisation. And again, the feedback I got was, well, you're a mental health first aider. You surely should know what you've got to do. Well, I do, but I'm past that. I need something more. And then the conversation carried on. Well, I know someone in the organisation who's got in a worse place than you, and they're fine. So I was like, oh. And then the absolute gold dust, and now the best piece of advice I've ever received is, well, just go for a run and tell your brain to you'd be absolutely fine. Like, brilliant. Why didn't I think of this before? No, what life-changing experience. So I wish I and then along with, but I'll tell you what, and the big red alarm which I should have spotted was, but keep it between us. Yeah, don't speak to HR. Don't speak to anyone else in the organisation, or any of your team members. We'll just keep it between us. And me being rock bottom, all right then, I'll carry on, and I won't mention it anymore. And yeah, again, the stigma's right. And I said I hit rock bottom, ended up with being signed off, off of work, and how am I going to bounce back? And I'm fortunate I've got a loving family around me, and so I was one of the lucky few. But that was the bad side. But on the flip side, because it got that bad, I saw a different doctor. I'm on medication I need to be on. I've got the antidepressants, which I needed, and ignore the stigma on the antidepressants. They to help. If you've got a headache, you take a tablet, don't you? And I was dead against it, but it's got me to where I needed to be. So again, different doctor, got the support. Joining Thriver couldn't have been any better, being sort of welcomed with open arms. For the interview process, I thought I've got to open up, received very, very well. Since I've been at Thriver, they've put every staff member on mental health awareness courses. They've trained up mental health first aiders. We've got support groups where people can openly talk. We've got a safe place we can go to and talk. We've got wellness action plans. So if that happens, then we can do this. And even from the managing director, it's a fortnightly meeting with him, is everything okay? What can we do? It's all open. We can talk about it. It's not, how about they find out? Looking over your shoulder. Am I looking happy enough? Am I doing this? Or it's all that thoughts that's gone. So I think, honestly, opening up is far easier than living with it. And it's surprising how many people you talk to go, yeah, I know, I've had that. Oh, I know that. Oh, I'm on that medication. I've done that. And rightly or wrongly, sorry, I'm going to end it here, but my mindset's changed. Disclosure should be seen as a two-way thing. We all worry, what's the employer going to say? But what do you need? If you're going to actually step up and do it and say, I need this, and I've got that, and this can affect me, and it falls on deaf ears, you don't get the support you require, do you really want to work for that organisation?
Yeah.
there's
a lot more who will work with you.
Yeah, it's such an important piece there, Chris. Thank you so much for sharing that. You know, I think everybody here really appreciates your honesty, and I think that last point, that it really is necessary. Like, employers really have to take this all seriously now. They have to be more inclusive. They have to put things in place. You know, if we think that employers are struggling, they're losing staff, they're struggling to fill positions, you know, if they don't start to make these changes, then they're not going to get the great staff coming through, such as yourselves.
I actually, that resonated with me so much. I just have to say, Chris, thanks for sharing that. Like, I think toxic positivity is a huge issue in kind of a lot of corporate spaces these days. I've literally had a similar situation to you where I disclosed some like mental health issues I was having at the time to a manager, and she literally said, yeah, no, I noticed you really need to smile a bit more when you're in the workplace, because, you know, when you're here, you need to put your happy face on. And also, like, just know that there's at least 10 people here who have it worse than you.
It's not any help, is it? And it puts you right off.
I know, and like only I'd been in like a year of therapy by then, and I knew better than to actually believe what she was saying to me. Yeah. Like, that could have really negatively impacted
people don't know. I think what people don't realize is how damaging words like that can be. They might say something flippantly to you because, and we don't know, they might say it because they don't know anything else what to say. So they feel like they have to say something, but that one comment, how long it can stay with you for after that. And if you have been doing work to get well, or you've been seeing a therapist, you've been working on strategies, how much something like that can put you right back to the beginning again. So all the work that you've been doing in the background is kind of undone. We've had a really great question here from Matt, and it's something that has come up in other meetings I've been at. So thanks for asking, Matt. So how do you think organisations can support when you have a visible disability? So basically, disclosure is taken out of your hands because people, you have no control over disclosure at all. So have you guys come across that in the past? Have you got any kind of things to optimize?
Yeah, I'll take that one, Emma, if that's okay. And it is a brilliant question, Matt. And I think just to kind of follow on from what Emma was saying, very much around this is around, line managers playing that absolutely crucial role, that to be a manager of people, you need a very particular set of skills, if that's not a Liam Neeson line. But, to have that way of nurturing your team to get the best out of people, and then therefore equipping managers with the language to use and the questions to ask and what not to say, and really, really challenging lots of those myths and misconceptions out there. Because you are responsible for a person as part of your team, and having been a manager of a very large team, I understand this from lots of different angles. But also, as a manager, to get your team to perform to their best, even if you don't want the moral and social responsibility, if you want your team to perform to their best, they need to be well, they need to be engaged, they need to be motivated. So whichever way you cut this is an absolute business imperative to have this as part of line manager training. And certainly all the years of line manager training I've done, it hasn't really featured. So it's definitely something that we need to start doing. And particularly then when we think about that broadish range of disabilities. So particularly when somebody does kind of approach with visible disabilities, and this again goes back to this kind of attitudinal thing that's out there, we are absolutely couched in a deficit model of disability. And I am on a one-woman mission, and I know there are lots of other people in this space as well, to change that disability does not mean not abled, but actually, our education system, and seeing the comment that Francis has put, couldn't agree more. Our education system is totally couched in what you can't do, what you struggle with, what you have difficulties with, very much this sort of medical idea of deficit and disorder. And that then perpetuates the whole sphere after that. So certainly into employment. So then when, somebody arrives that's got a visible disability, what assumptions do then people make around that? And this again goes back to having a conversation around somebody. If somebody is our most visible symbol of disability is a wheelchair user, but 4% of disabled people are full-time wheelchair users. If you put a wheelchair user in a space that's got step-free access, they are not disabled by that environment. And so very often that might be the only kind of physical adaptation or accommodation that somebody might need. Very often not, but sometimes it's about just having that conversation and definitely avoiding assumptions. I do think people are well-intentioned, but very often people lose all sense of common sense when it comes to, I must go into overdrive because there's a disabled person in front of me. I mean, I've sat on recruitment panels where a wheelchair user candidate came in, the chair of the panel got up, whipped away the chair that she was about to transfer into, took her handbag for some bizarre reason, but was very, very
People
well
just
intentioned.
panic.
I must panic. I must help. But theft is something different. So again, it comes from a well-intentioned place. It's about normalizing the conversation. Having that open dialogue of that people can find their comfortable space within that as well. But I think definitely it's about avoiding that assumption, really thinking about having that conversation with somebody, what, somebody might be doing in a particular role, and therefore identifying where adjustments might exist, might need to be explored. If that doesn't kind of, if that expertise isn't within the team, it's then about looking to maybe occupational health, but or an independent workplace assessment. So really kind of thinking about those kind of specialist disability practitioners, particularly around neurodivergence, that can come in, have a very frank, open conversation with the individual, and then have a conversation with the line manager as well, and bring all parties together as part of that solution. So I think really to kind of share that people aren't on their own with that, of trying to understand what reasonable looks like, but being open to kind of opening up the conversation.
I think that's a great answer, Kate. And I do think we very much focus when we talk about disclosure on hidden disabilities, mental health. And actually, I don't think there's enough conversations around visible disability and disclosure. So I'd love to perhaps do another one of these and invite other people along with a visible disability. I was actually in a meeting the other day and someone asked the same question as Matt, but from a point of what about someone that's acquired a physical disability later in life through an accident and they've been in the workplace and then they have no control over disclosing, but actually their whole being has completely changed overnight, their whole way of doing things. So it's such an interesting question, Matt, and I think it's a whole topic that deserves like a full on hour at a minimum for us to cover. But if you do have any thoughts yourself, Matt, or want us to cover anything, you can get in touch with us directly and we can kind of try and build something out to work with organisations to best kind of support.
If I can just add one more point to that, Emma, I know we've only just covered question one, but just because I think it's really important also to add to Matt's brilliant point and brilliant question is also around, when we're talking about sharing that information around disability, who are we talking about sharing it with? Is it just that pre-employment stuff and then it's never discussed again, particularly if someone acquires a disability? At what points are those opportunities for check-in happening through working for an organisation, but also working with colleagues as well, and how colleagues can be allies to other team members, and adversely how sometimes it can't be very helpful. So again, it's just about making this an open, frank conversation that lots of people can engage with, because there's so much learning that comes from that. It can only be a good thing if it's put in, a positive support.
And actually, even dispelling that notion that for example, not all physical disabilities are visible either. Because I actually had a conversation recently with someone I know who has a prosthetic leg, and I was like, God, our experiences must be so different. You didn't even have the choice as to whether to disclose, I'm assuming, and whereas I did because mine is hidden. He said, well, actually, mine is hidden too because my prosthetic is covered most of the time by clothes, and my colleagues didn't even notice for months. And he said, I don't walk with a limp or anything. So actually, I kind of had to just make up my own mind about whether I wanted to tell people or not, because I could actually probably get away with it the whole time, without anyone noticing. But it does actually impact my life. I can only walk so far in a day. I can't do something that involves an absolute ton of movement. So, even there's quite a blurred line between visible and invisible, and, voluntary and involuntary disclosure as well. So,
and it's just, I guess it's, it's even from ourselves, we all make preconceived assumptions. And I think from what you've all said, it's all about conversation, and it's all about being happy to say, oh, I didn't think of it like that, or I didn't realise that. No matter how long you've worked in the industry for, or how many people that you've supported, we can all get things wrong. And I think as long as everyone is open to being wrong and to learning, that's what will kind of drive the conversations to happen and drive the impact, the positive impact disclosure can have. So I guess what would be great to kind of in the kind of second half as we close up is to think, to hear from you guys, and if anyone has any comments I'd like to put into the chat as well. What would you like to see happening? I know, Kate, that you've mentioned a few things already, but what would you like to see happening to ensure that disclosure is positive, is inclusive, and truly enable someone to kind of bring their whole self to work? So, Chris, let's start with you, because we've been chattering for a bit. So the floor is yours.
I think, as I said, disclosure is a positive thing. there has to be an end strategy. If you open up and you're working with the employee or the individuals open up, there has to be open communication. You know, let's improve the communication with them. So, for example, the first step I could think automatically from my scenarios is someone is coming to you to disclose some personal information. Let them finish talking. You know, because the worst thing is they would have played it over and over and over in their mind. How will it be received? What am I going to say? How's it going to play? So make sure they finish what they want to say, because I think that it's so important. If not, you go, should have said that as well. Should have. It's and most importantly, show empathy. You know, thank them for trusting you. You know, coming to you to disclose the information. Make sure they know. Just reassure them. This won't affect your, you know, it won't affect you within your working life. We are here to work with you and to support you, and we will continue doing that. You know, it stays to a certain extent between us. We'll only involve the people who need to be involved. It's not going to be blurted around the office. Again, it's that trust. And I think where a lot of people, employers do go wrong, they automatically go into right solution mode. Right, we can do this. No. Take a step back. First of all, find out a bit more from the individual. So have you had this before? Have you had support before? How can we support you? And work with them. And then if it was like me with the mental health, I didn't have a clue. I was lost. I was like, I don't know. I just need help. I don't get where it comes from. And then I think for the employed, just work with them to find out, signpost. Again, you're not there to diagnose. And that's I find a lot with neurodiversity. People assume, well, you must be autistic because you're shying away from conversation. You're not looking me in the eye, or you're ADHD because you've got lots of energy. And you know, where people are so quick to diagnose. Don't diagnose, signpost, find out, work together. Is this a good scenario for you? Do you want us to go on an awareness course? You know, do we need maybe someone to come in for diagnostic or workplace assessments? Do you want a professional route? Do you want to talk to someone? Do we let other team members involved so we haven't got the stigma like, I want that, why have they got this? You know, just all these conversations, but including every step of the way, be transparent. And if they, as I said, so if they don't know, work with them. I think very important thing as well, try and learn from it, you know, implement the strategy. Just don't do an awareness course going, well, that's done. You know, I've done that one, that's all I need to do. That's when you start falling into box ticking exercise. And that's awareness training like the ones we do. They're brilliant, but it's more about raise the awareness, to use it step one. Then you find out, do we need co-coaching? Do we need workplace? Let's escalate from there, but let's start working on getting rid of the stigma. And just, as I said, learn from this experience, implement a strategy, and see if it can be affecting other people as well. You know, chances are it's affecting mine. It could be more people in the business. So what can you do to learn and implement a change? And again, improve communication with staff, even if you got it in a confidential way. You know, your staff are your biggest assets. They will happily open up and say, we need help in this, so I'm struggling with that. But yeah, I'd say do it in a confidence way, so people are happy to open up and reassure them, as I said, that it won't affect their career.
Perfect. I love that answer. I think it's really interesting what you said at the beginning, because I think what we find is when somebody discloses or wants to talk about some of the challenges that they might be having, we naturally want to provide solutions. So managers will naturally go, well, what about this? And what about this? And let's do that, rather than just sit back. We find it really hard to listen. Just sit. Not everything, and sometimes not everything requires a solution. Sometimes it's just enough to have the space for a conversation as well. So, you know, be there to facilitate solutions, but don't jump in there with a solution so quickly, because you're not then hearing the full piece and the full person. Mel, what do you have any kind of thoughts on that to offer or provide?
Actually, what Chris was saying there just reminded me of the best piece of advice I ever got, which was when someone comes to you with a problem, the first question you ask is like, do you just want a vent or do you want solutions? Because sometimes people aren't ready to receive a solution just yet and just want to feel their feelings for a bit. So
I think my husband should take that often, because often I just want to vent. I don't want to be provided with a solution.
Yeah, exactly. But I think it applies to this topic as well. But yeah, no, I think the big thing when it comes to autism that I think is a trap that it's tempting for a lot of employers to fall into is kind of adopting a one-size-fits-all approach to how they accommodate autistic colleagues and everything, which, you know, if you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person. I have two autistic brothers and they are polar opposites to me. Like, we're all autistic in extremely different ways. And I think just trying to fit all of us into the one box when we have such varying strengths and challenges would just be such a huge disservice to the diversity of the spectrum. So I think the huge thing when it comes to accommodating autistic people in the workplace is that it needs to be tailored to the individual, and there needs to be like a conversation, so it's not based on preconceived notions of what you think someone's needs might be based on what you perceive autism in general to be. So like, I mean, to give you an example, like the major sensory challenge that I have as an autistic person is around sound. I'm extremely sensitive to noise. So like, I mean, I literally passed out on a tram on my way home from work once because it had been a particularly intense day in the office environment. It was really loud that day because there were like leaving parties and things going on. And there was just so much chatter and tannoy announcements and stuff going on in the train that I just got overstimulated and passed out. So, you know, as you can imagine, all the ambient noises in an office environment are kind of difficult for me to focus in. So, you know, things that I've done to combat that is just, you know, wear ear defenders, ask to go to a part of the office that's quieter, you know, take regular breaks to decompress, sort of recalibrate myself. But then for someone else, it might be, you know, fluorescent lights that are overstimulating them. It might be the smell of someone's lunch. It could be the texture of the clothes that they're often expected to wear in an office setting. So I suppose my point is that just because dimming the lights works for Steve, it doesn't mean dimming the lights is going to work for Peter. You need to actually have a dialogue around that and find the specific supports that that particular individual will benefit from. It's not something you can go and copy and paste based on what you did with a previous autistic colleague. And I'd also say like followed through is extremely important because once the accommodations have been agreed on, because I know I've been in situations in the past where like accommodations were agreed and then they just never happened. And I got to a point where it was actually more exhausting for me to keep chasing up on the things I asked for rather than just accepting I'm not getting the accommodations and just carrying on business as usual. So I think, you know, it can be disheartening when you feel like you're shouting into an echo chamber. So I suppose really what I'm saying is it's a really great start to agree to accommodations in principle, but you need to make sure that it's going to work in practice, and like, you know, working in tandem to bring these supports to life is what's really going to set like your hires up for success. So I suppose the people who are like on the fence about disclosing or are thinking about it, do what's best for you, but you know, remember that you're not asking for the world when you ask to be accommodated. And also maybe just have a bit of compassion and a bit of patience at the start, because you're probably not going to get it spot on straight away, and that's absolutely okay. It's going to take a bit of dialogue with your manager to find what's best for you. But, you know, you'll both be learning together, and ultimately they can't tear down any barriers if they don't know it exists. And actually something that I've found even in the past 4 weeks since I've started working for Rangam is that like, it's kind of strange that I actually haven't even had to ask for very much in the way of accommodations, because I find that the processes and the dynamic that we have as a team is already very neurodivergent friendly, and it's just kind of built in and integrated, which I suppose isn't that surprising because I'm actually lucky enough to be on like a team that happens to be 100% neurodivergent, which is extremely unusual, but also really cool. But I think ultimately I dream of us reaching a world someday where like, you know, many workplaces are like this, and we have like neuro inclusivity just so integrally baked into like companies' culture, their design, their processes, that like disclosure will no longer be the big event that it can often feel like for disabled people, you know, nowadays. So, you know, that's an end game worth working towards, and I'm hopeful that we actually can achieve it one small step at a time, because, you know, it feels very slow sometimes, but I think attitudes are evolving, and, you know, barriers are gradually being removed, but, you know, a lot done, a lot more to do.
I think it's really interesting that you say that, because I think one of the things is if we want it to be universal design and people to just, you know, that's just what happens. So ideally, what we want to do is do ourselves out of a job. like we shouldn't have a job, like we
Yeah,
shouldn't
literally.
exist. You know, we shouldn't have to go in and do these things. Like hopefully in 10, 15 years time there won't be as much need for
make us
well
hear you.
and I think it's interesting that you say about so I think from I think what some organizations might say when they hear some of this is it takes us a long time to put adjustments in place or to get things moving and to get things going. What we'd say is, well, actually, that's fine that it takes time, but keep having the conversations, because it's the expectations. You know, if you do check-ins on a weekly, 2-weekly basis, don't not do a check-in because you've not been able to get the solution in place. Check in anyway. Let that person know you're still looking into it, that there's some, you know, there's some things that are preventing it going as fast as you'd like, and then discuss any alternatives. So don't just don't only put meetings in once an adaptation has been solved. Like continue to do
and also I think people think of accommodations as this huge expensive thing. Like they think of things like wheelchair ramps and like like they think of physical objects as opposed to really like literally an example of accommodation is like me sitting in the meeting saying, can I turn on transcripts? Can I turn on live captions? I process the information better that way. It's literally like a sentence. It's like, yeah, okay, or like, are you okay with me recording this or something like that? Like
or turning your video off, letting people turn their videos off in meetings so they don't have to stare at the screen.
At no cost to the company, and it's so easy. All you have to do is say, yeah, I agree to that. You know,
so it's all built into your system, isn't it? All built into your computer and everything. So
if anything,
it's so many things at our fingertips now that we can use as adaptations that we don't need to kind of go out there. And I know, Kate, you are the queen, I think, of assistive technology. The amount of times you've gone, have you heard about this? And it's absolutely incredible.
I mean, I know enough to talk about it. Don't ask me for like.
I put a lot of pressure on you there as the queen of assistive technology. So over to you then. So what do you think? Kind of, I'm sure you agree with everything that's already been said. But is it like, what other things do you think that maybe organisations can do to make sure everything's positive, inclusive?
I've desperately been managing my impulse control not to butt in, but my brain is going off in all sorts of different directions. I've been scribbling down things. Totally agree with what everyone said, and hopefully, you know, there's some really sensible, pragmatic, quick wins, low cost, no cost. This is about, you know, doing things in a very, very sensible way where we get maximum benefit from it. And when organisations do that, the results that we're starting to see come back are staggering. So, you know, some of the big accountancy firms, tech companies, they're seeing, particularly with autistic employers, outperforming non-autistic employers by staggering amounts, you know, whether it be double the amount of work, whether it be sort of 90% retention rates, all these things that organisations are battling and grappling with of how to attract and retain talent. Well, this is a good starting point. So I think for me, there's definitely that piece around, you know, the line manager and the individual having that relationship that a line manager and team member should have, that open dialogue that's supportive, that's nurturing. And also, I think, Mel, it was you that said about not having to keep telling your line manager. It's highly unlikely that you would need to keep reminding your line manager that you needed to pick the kids up at 3. So why should you have to keep reminding someone that it's really helpful for you to have documents in advance of a meeting, or, you know, to have them electronically rather than hard copy so you can modify the text with technology? But really using the technology that we've got at our grasp, we've got so much that enables people to work to their strengths. But I think from an organisation point of view, my starting point would be that for me, language conveys a very, very powerful message. And my starting point would actually be that perhaps we question the word disclosure. You disclose a criminal record, you disclose abuse. You know, this is not a secret. This is very often part of you, or it's something that, you know, may happen throughout your working career. 83% of disabilities are acquired throughout someone's working career, whether they're gradual, you know, through hearing loss or sight loss, whether they're sudden through a cancer diagnosis. This is a huge amount of our workforce that we're talking about potentially. So I would encourage people to talk about sharing information rather than disclosing necessarily. Declaration, you know, making it a more positive or neutral language conveys that message. There's definitely something around challenging the myths and misconceptions. That's a huge piece of work. but also around, we very often hear about, well, if I do that for you, then I think someone's already said it, about the unfair advantage, the myth of an unfair advantage, or that floodgates, everybody will want it, all these things we hear all the time. Well, actually, as a manager, that's about having that conversation with each of your team to say, what can I do to support you to work to your strengths? What is it that where I can get the best out of you? And really kind of having that conversation. And then definitely totally subscribe to us all being on a boat in the Bahamas, because we don't need to do this anymore because we've done
the Bahamas. I've never thought of that as an end game there, Kate.
I mean, I'm not sure we get the payoff that takes us to that point, but we can dream. An ADHD brain is always dreaming. But really kind of move into those more inclusive practices, that if the last 2 years have taught us anything, what we have learned is that working from home, which was the most refused request for a reasonable adjustment, has actually led to ridiculous levels of productivity, to the point where people have kind of burnt themselves out with some things. It hasn't worked for some people, it's worked for others. But really kind of thinking about, if we're moving to more agile spaces, giving people that autonomy, that flexibility to look at changing working hours, working locations, being more flexible with these things that don't cost money to do those things, and really thinking about how we can establish communication preferences with somebody. So if it is the case that for all of our online meetings we all turn off our videos, or we understand that someone might pop in and out of video because either the 20 tiles of people's background is too stimulating, or I need to get up and move around, all of those things that actually we can do that make a massive difference for people. And really just kind of taking that forward, so we get people working to their strengths. So the more people are working to their strengths, the less adjustments we have to make.
It's amazing, isn't it? It seems kind of absolutely bonkers that you would want someone to have their video on, looking at the screen, and all they're thinking about is everything like that, and taking in absolutely nothing. So you're not getting any, the reason you've employed that person is for their skills, but what you're expecting them to do is not allowing the skills to be brought into your business that you've employed them for in the first place. You don't go into an interview thinking, oh yes, I'd really like to employ you because you'd be great on video camera in a team meeting. Like, that's just not part of it. So all of these little things that are just so easy to do. And I think from my perspective as well, it's just keep the conversation going. Don't just have one conversation. And even, people change, people's circumstances change. Yes, the diagnosis stays the same, but everything is going to change around that person. People go through different stages of their lives.
All conditions fluctuate.
Yeah. And Mal, yes, disclosure, like as declaration, so true. And I think I love that, Kate. I think we should just kind of really go with that and push it and make that change. Because declaration, it's so much more strengths-based. Often disclosures about what are you going to find difficult, rather than what are you amazing at and what can we put in place to make sure you continue to be amazing. Like, I would hate to have to go into any interview and say, I'm really sorry, I can be pretty rubbish at spreadsheets. Like, a spreadsheet is a tiny part of my job that, yes, I have to do and do that well. My manager might listen into this at some point, but he's right. But yeah, I could do, but it's not in my mind. I won't do it fast. It'll take me a longer time to do it than somebody else with that skill set. Yeah. And I think it's not necessarily that people can't do the things. It's the amount of time and resource and the mind space it takes to get them done to the stage of other people
that could be better spent on something that people do really well.
Exactly.
And I think, you focus on strengths, and if you find something challenging, we've said assistive technologies there, or support, or a colleague, work towards your strengths. It just makes sense, doesn't it? Absolutely. And I think it's really important to point out, if you are carrying out reasonable adjustments, or you come up with a wellness action plan, they're not set in stone. They can change. You might not get it right first time around. Always be open-minded to and ask. As I said, don't just do it and forget it. Is it working for you? Do we need to make tweaks? How are you finding it? Just keep that communication going, and that brings confidence as well to the employees. Like, oh, actually, I can open up, I can talk, and I'm not embarrassed saying, actually, we all did the wrong thing, because it's not helping anyone, is it? It's
so much of it boils down to just not being afraid of being wrong.
Yeah, exactly.
That's it. From everybody, it's like, I think we're all so worried about getting things wrong, or not being told we don't know something, that's often the biggest barrier. So we've come to the end of a conversation that I think we could probably all carry on with all day, and I bet all of our brains are now fizzing with ideas and other things that we want to share. But I just want to say thank you so much, people listening in today, and we will make this freely available, and please do share it out. But you three have made this conversation incredible, and it's so nice to hear. I think everyone appreciates your honesty, your openness, and it's by having these honest, open conversations that will drive that change and innovation within businesses. So thank you so much.